Data protection and privacy teams are under more pressure than ever with new laws, AI oversight, data breaches, and the constant expectation to do more with fewer resources.
That's why TrustArc built a modern privacy and data protection management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. It unifies your tools, automates the work that slows you down, and surfaces what matters most right when you need it.
From guided quick actions to our intelligent assistant, Ask Arc, you get credible, contextual answers backed by expert research, not generic AI guesses.
Finally, privacy that works the way privacy pros work.
Learn how TrustArc helps teams move faster with confidence at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.
This is Serious Privacy. Here are your hosts, Paul Breitbart and Kay Royal.
Extra. Welcome to an extra Serious Privacy episode on the UK GDPR. Of course, Kay and I recorded our regular episode this week on a week in privacy, looking back at everything that has happened in the past month. But while recording, the UK GDPR, the new version, was submitted to Parliament by the UK government. And we thought, wouldn't it be great if we can ask some of our UK friends to contribute to a special episode of Serious Privacy discussing this very topic, and so we did. So my name is Paul Breitbart.
And I'm Kay Royal, and welcome to Serious Privacy. I would try to skip the unexpected question, but we get flack on it, but I'm going to make it very short. Do you like your middle name? Yes or no?
Well, hello everybody. Ralph O'Brien. It's nice to be back on the Serious Privacy podcast.
Oh, you're just co-host all the time.
I don't get an introduction anymore. Okay. Well, I am a doubting Thomas, and my middle name is Thomas. So there we go.
I love it, Paul.
Which one of the three are you referring to?
No, I love it. Do you like all three?
I do, actually. Yeah.
And you make up for me as I don't have one.
Well, that's that. That's the unexpected question covered. So
done. Move into the music. No, seriously.
How it will go
here.
today. How it will go today. This is an extra episode. It will be a bit chaotic.
Yes.
We are recording live with Ralph O'Brien, who you've heard already and you know already. Kay will only be here with us for about 10 minutes, and then I'll continue the conversation with Ralph. So yes, it's chaos, but that's what you get with an extra episode.
Yes.
And we thought this topic was too important to just let go. So Kay, given that you are only here for a few minutes, why don't you ask the first question for a change?
Oh, wow. All right, Ralph. So I don't think that there were a lot of provisions of what came out that hadn't been guessed at or presupposed or somehow anticipated. Was there anything unexpected that you saw in this that really made you like, seriously, people?
Not actually within the bill. So just to clarify, you've talked about the UK GDPR. What's actually been released is the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill. So this is a new law within the UK that essentially adds a layer of track changes to our existing data protection law.
DPDI?
Yeah, DPDI. Yeah,
DPDI.
Yeah, DPDI. The law itself hasn't changed very much from the first reading. I think it's fair to be say, they are the first reading we had that way back last year. So my old gripes still remain. I think what's really interesting with this one is actually it was the press release. The press release was given by Michelle Donnelly, our minister for our newly created Department of Science, Innovation and Technology. She actually read that press release at IAPP London this week for a whole 9 minutes before she
read
walked,
the press release.
Before she walked off the stage with no questions.
And bam, that's how
very
you do
telling.
And no questions. And the headline is, it's going to save British businesses 400 billion or something like that.
How?
It's based on an impact assessment, which you can see on the UK government website.
Is that like the CCPA's budget impact assessment, which basically said implementing the CCPA will not cost companies anything?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It kind of says it'll save us 400 billion, and it's got some really interesting statistics in there, like companies pay 60 or 70 pounds a week for cookie consent tools that they're obviously not going to have to use anymore, and
60 or
Okay.
70 pounds a week?
exactly.
Then they're seriously overpaying.
Right.
And it's going to save them £950 a year on data protection officers, apparently. I know.
Those SRIs aren't really going to replace DPOs. Let's.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So there's a number of interesting numbers in here, I think, especially, looking at the fact that, maintaining adequacy, that's going to be another benefit as well, right?
Someone hasn't put their hand in the reality cookie jar.
Yeah, so I think while there isn't a huge amount of changes in the actual bill, and my old gripes remain, I still think if the UK wanted to do something brave, they could have done. They could have introduced some sweeping new framework that consolidates everything we already have: PCR, data protection, UK GDPR. Brought all that stuff together. They could have done something brave if they wanted to. They could have done something different or better if they wanted to. But it feels to me, again, and I've said this before, it's just another layer of track changes, another layer of complexity, something else people will have to deal with. And if you're dealing with the EU, you're going to have to do the GDPR properly anyway. So again, it feels to me like it's a problem, not a solution.
So you take this with at least the press release with a couple of buckets of salt.
Buckets. I'm drowning in salt, Paul. I'm drowning in salt. It's not all bad. It's not all bad. There are some positives I can say. It doesn't just amend data protection law. It does set up this idea of sort of digital verification, which is create some law around sort of identity providers online. And it does bring the fining penalties for our PCR, our marketing law, our implementation of e-privacy up to the same penalty level as the GDPR, 4% of global annual turnover, or for us, £17.5 million, for Europeans, 20 million euros. So there is some positive, but. Oh man, the negatives. Where do I begin?
What do you think is the worst negative, or are they all just kind of equal in your eyes?
There's some interesting ones in there. Abolishment of the Article 27 representative.
How are they going to do personal jurisdiction?
Yeah, so how do you enforce out of jurisdiction by extraterritorial extent? That's going to be interesting.
Or has Europe not been able to enforce extraterritorially for companies that did not appoint a European representative, like that one that was in Canada with the family genealogy, and they didn't appoint one? I mean, did they ever actually pay their fine? Because were they subject?
Not yet, but they're still being hunted down.
See, maybe they're just eliminating a complication that they don't see any practical.
I don't know.
I'm struggling for words here.
Yeah, I think by far, as well as adding all these extra layers of exemption and, basically replacing almost like for like, as you say, DPOs of SRIs, data protection impact assessments with, data protection risk assessments with DPIAs. Replacing records of processing with essentially the same thing. My biggest worry, I think, out of all this is some of the changes to the Commissioner's office. Almost making them more answerable to Parliament, less independent, having to make them consider, the economic interests of the countries before they start to issue penalties, a lot more of sort of getting rid of an ICO and bringing in a sort of a government-appointed management committee, having to report to government every year on, and getting all their codes of practice approved by the government. I just worry about the independence of the regulator. I really worry about the independence of the regulator and their ability to, I think the entire starting point of this legislation is data protection bad, Europe bad,
business good,
bad, and therefore I think they've missed that that data protection can be a positive force to make products and services in a way that individuals can really benefit from, and of course the protection of individuals from harm as well. And I just worry, I just worry about harms. I just worry that, at the end of the day, it'll be individuals that suffer, or that are harmed in the name of making the UK a business friendly, innovation friendly place. That's my key concern.
So I guess the Information Commissioner came out pretty strong against all these proposals that will water down his position during his speech at IAPP, right?
Well, you'd think, but John Edwards came out in support of the bill. I think it's fair to say we've got an Information Commissioner who's a political animal. I think we welcome the bill, and we welcome further conversations with government along the way about the ICO sort of new role, I guess.
So is this him saying, well, you do what you want, but I don't believe that this will pass Parliament before the next elections, and we'll see what happens then, but I'm not going to antagonize the government in the meantime? Or is this really the ICO supports this bill?
That's a very good question, Paul. I'm not inside John Edwards' head to answer that. However, I would... Yeah, you have to remember these early days. This is the second reading, and therefore it's got to go through the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and anything could change the next half an hour. Anything could be changed along that journey. And I do believe, as you've just said, should we go to another general election, that the current government of the day, which is quite an authoritarian government, will no longer be in power. However, it's how much damage the current government do before that happens. So if this does happen to get rushed through, the digital agenda of the government at the moment is, let's say, anti-human rights, pro-business and innovation, at the expense of the individual. So when it comes to, and worryingly, I think my opinion, and I can't speak for the ICO here, is there is a worrying trend for the ICO at the moment in their speeches to be regurgitating some of that messaging from the UK government.
Yeah, I get why you consider that to be a concern. So earlier this week, Joe Jonas of the IAPP released an article after a very quick read of the bill and the explanatory memorandum, highlighting a few topics. And one for me that really stood out was research, and then actually in a positive way, because it seems that there will be better legal grounds to process research data under this new DPDIA, whatever we're going to call it, the updated UK GDPR.
So the Data Protection and Digital Innovation Bill, one of the things in it is to try and make it easier, to use data for research. Again, I'm not opposed to the idea. I think it's, I think, making easier legal gateways to allow valuable scientific research to occur is great. Like anything else, lawful basis is one thing. The other thing is actually making sure you've got practical safeguards in place to make sure that individuals aren't harmed. So fully support the idea, fully support making research and scientific innovation easier. At the same time, let's just make sure the individual doesn't come to harm by sharing data with, let's just say, large commercial companies, as opposed to the more traditional research organizations.
So what about direct marketing? That would be more in the electronic communication space, I would assume. I think at least that the main focus would still be on online direct marketing and not the old-fashioned leaflets that somebody sends you via the regular mail, via British Post. But
Well, you have to apply the both, right? You have to apply the GDPR as the lex generalis, or the data protection as the lex generalis, and then you have to apply PCR or e-privacy as the lex specialis. So you are correct, of course. If anything goes through an electronic network of any kind, PCR needs to be applied, as well as data protection. So data protection covers marketing for, let's say, post and the collection of that data. People have got an absolute right to object under the GDPR. But then, yes, when it comes to electronic, it is the PCR. And one of the things I'm really, really pleased about in here, and as I think I said before, is that the PCR has got sort of a much needed uplift with this digital information bill. It doesn't just change the data protection law, it changes the PCR law as well to make sure that the penalties would be the same. However, there is a lot of talk in here about using legitimate interests for direct marketing. There is a lot of talk in here about getting rid of those horrible cookie banners. And the quote as part of the press release was how welcomed this is by the Direct Marketing Association.
Well, you'd wonder why.
Yeah. So it does lead me to believe that, getting rid of those horrible cookie banners, I mean, whilst nobody enjoys them, I think being transparent and making sure that there are controls around online profiling is still an important thing, and I think, I would have preferred to see a law that said, okay, we're going to support a sort of a do not track in the browser, rather than kind of saying, well, it's okay to do it. I think, I would have much preferred, a law that supported, sort of browser-based consent that was legally enforced than something that kind of, carves out a wedge which will be wide enough for direct marketing organizations to, carry on doing what they're doing, right?
Mm-hmm. What keeps bugging me about this legislative change are all the cosmetic changes that are supposed to gain British business millions of pounds back as well. One of them, that for data subject rights, they can be refused under the GDPR if they are manifestly unfounded or excessive. And a key change is that will no longer be the case. No, henceforth, it will only be, you can only refuse them if they are vexatious or excessive.
Vexatious or excessive. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what that means. Manifestly unfounded kind of makes me think that, you can refuse them if, people aren't doing them for the right reasons. People aren't doing them because, data subject access requests have always been what we've called purpose blind, right? Purpose blind. So, someone puts in an access request, technically, you're not really allowed to ask why, you just give them their right. But I think the word vexatious then kind of makes you think, well, you've got to start looking at the reason why putting in their access request. And if you believe they're doing it to be annoying or because,
disgruntled employees is the thing that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, as the result of a bad, experience, right? And at the end of the day, why do people put in subject access request? Because they've had a bad experience. Because they have got a grudge or a grievance that they need to be sorted out. So I think some of those changes in words are difficult. There's even a move to change the very definition of personal data. If you read some of the first clauses of the bill, it becomes, and bearing in mind this bill, by the way, is almost 300 pages long, 393 pages long. So, a lot more of this detail will come out over time. But, one of the very first things we see in there is, for the purposes of this act, it's only information relating to an identifiable living being if the living being is identifiable by something the controller has reasonable means at the time of processing. So, we talk about identifiable before under the GDPR. Now we're kind of saying, well, we're not also anticipating whether we might identify them in the future. If we could identify them in the future and we're just collecting data, that isn't personal data. Because it's at the time of processing can they be identified. And then secondly, it says where the controller or processor knows or ought to reasonably know that another person will or is likely to obtain the information as a result of processing, or the living individual will or is likely to be identifiable by that person by reasonable means at the time of processing. So again, there's this sort of almost limiting of what personal data is, even right at the start of the law.
Interesting. And the other one that keeps surprising me, and maybe wrap up with that one, is on the records of processing activities. We know that in most of the US laws, keeping a register is not required, but you need to have a good understanding of what personal data you are processing in order to be able to assess, for example, whether you need to do an impact assessment or whether certain thresholds are met. Under the new UK bill, it is also said that record of processing activities are only required for organizations that carry out processing activities likely to result in high risk to the right and freedoms of data subjects. Explain to me, Ralph, how will you do that assessment if you don't have any idea of what personal data you are processing, for which reasons, and where you keep it?
Yeah, no, I agree. I've always tried to make the distinction between what I call a ROPA, which is, that sort of high-level superset that you might make available either yourself or via a representative to a regulator, and then your actual, what you need to demonstrate compliance. I actually think that what's in Article 30 is slightly different than what you would need for Article 24, which is, in order to demonstrate compliance, you need to know, what data you've got and who you're going to give it to. And again, my worry here is that, this could be taken or could be read. A lot of people don't differentiate between a data inventory and a ROPA. And therefore, my worry here is it could be read that, again, this is work that we don't need to do. We can just carry on going without understanding our information. And therefore, as you say, whether something's high risk or not becomes very difficult to determine, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So any final tidbits that you think are relevant for our listeners to hear about?
Well, I suppose what I would be saying is it's not law yet. Anything could happen. And secondly, you can ignore it. The ICO has pretty much said if you're dealing with the EU and you're a larger organisation and you're subject to the GDPR, nothing in here kind of imposes massive new obligations on you. In fact, if anything, it lessens the law. So what I'll be saying to my customers certainly is, carry on as usual, don't panic. And, if you are dealing with the EU or working internationally, carry on with the GDPR compliance you've already done. And this probably is not going to affect you a great deal. I think it will only affect companies who are looking for a way out or the softening of a law, rather than those who are dealing with the EU and are carrying on with the level of compliance to which and the level of value adds and design innovation that the GDPR promotes.
Well, we'll see what happens. Thank you very much for giving us some insights on what this bill may bring. Whether or not it becomes a law remains to be seen. We'll certainly follow the conversation going forward. Let's listen to what some of our other UK friends of the podcast had to say on this bill.
Hi, Paul and Dr. Kay. It's Claire Archibald here, Data Protection Officer for Schools at the Education Data Hub. There are so many things I could pick out in this bill, and let's not forget the stated aim of the bill is to reduce complexity and make compliance and business easier. So one thing that caught my eye in particular is this proposed requirement for data controllers to have to deal with complaints. So this initially feels like a small amendment, but actually I think it may potentially have a big impact for my clients and many others. The current law states that data subjects have a right to complain to the Commissioner, but it doesn't actually state that there's a right to complain to the data controller. So, of course, many of us who provide data protection officer services know that controllers do actually indeed deal with complaints and take many, many hours to do so. And of course, it's in their interest to deal with complaints because the last thing you want as a controller is for a complainant to go to the Commissioner without the opportunity for you to address it yourself. But what concerns me is some of the prescriptive requirements around controllers' obligations. And firstly, what leapt out at me was there's going to be a requirement to provide a form electronically. And this is essentially a duplication of a sentence of the existing requirements of the Commissioner. However, not all controllers will have the resources of the commissioner to deal with complaints electronically. So some of them might be very small organisations who just don't have capacity to deal with complaints submitted in that way. So I'm going to need to think really carefully about how to incorporate an electronic process for some of my clients that doesn't accidentally sort of open the floodgates. As you know, we already tell data subjects in privacy notices who they can complain to with the contact details, and this does suffice and works well. I don't think my clients are going to be very happy about the prospect of having a complain here link on their website. The other thing is that the bill is also relatively prescriptive on how complaints should be dealt with. For example, it states that they must be acknowledged within 30 days. Some schools actually close entirely over the school holidays, so this isn't always achievable for them. Although, to be fair, this is a problem with the existing legislation when it comes to data subjects exercising their rights, and something that we have a lot of difficulty with our clients because subject access requests are very often submitted on the last day of the school term, and staff are not on premises to deal with them. Anyway, but schools do already have established complaints procedures, and now we're going to need to look to revise all of these. Otherwise, they're going to end up with a kind of 2 complaints tracks, depending on whether the complaint is data protection related or not. And that's really not going to be satisfactory. So schools are going to have to look at overhauling their entire complaints regime. My final point that I'm concerned about is this power of the Secretary of State to require controllers to publish complaint KPIs. And again, this might be a problem for school clients. You know, why would they publish their data protection related complaint statistics and not others? This could actually end up with being an additional burden and actually adding a layer of complexity for controllers who are trying to comply with the data protection regime. Cheers.
So that wraps up another episode of Serious Privacy, the special edition on the new UK GDPR proposals. The regular episode will also still be released in the coming days if we get time to get the edit done. That's the big caveat here. If you like the podcast, please leave a comment in your favorite podcast app or on your favorite podcast platform. Join the conversation on LinkedIn. Find us under Serious Privacy. You will find Kay on social media as Heart of Privacy, myself as Europol B, and Ralph as IGR O'Brien. Thank you for listening. Until next week, goodbye.
That was Serious Privacy.
If you're a data protection or privacy professional, you already know the pressure. Non-stop regulatory change, AI oversight, internal demands, and the expectation to somehow stay ahead of it all. And the old patchwork of tools just isn't cutting it anymore.
No. That's why TrustArc created a modern privacy management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. The TrustArc platform brings your workflows, evidence, research, tasks, and applications all together in one unified and intelligent workspace so you don't waste time digging, clicking, or context switching.
With Ask Arc, your privacy assistant, you can ask plain language questions about laws, jurisdictions, or even your own program data, and get credible, cited answers based on NIMBY research and more than 1,000 global laws. It's explainable, transparent, and purpose-built for data protection and privacy.
So if you need to add a vendor, create a cookie banner, or start an assessment, quick actions take formally complex tasks, turn them into bite-sized guided workflows to save you time.
It's a platform that thinks like you, works like you, and helps you move faster with confidence, whether you're a seasoned DPO or you're just getting started.
See how modern privacy gets done. Explore Arc at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.